This is just a short video on notation in calculus. So in calculus, we start off usually with a function that we want to differentiate. Often we call this function y. For example, we might have y equals 2x plus 5. If we differentiate this function, we get its derivative, or more specifically, its first derivative. If the function was called y, the first derivative is called dy dx. This dy dx refers to the fact that the function was called y and its variable was x. So here we can see the function was called y and it had x's in it. Its variable was x. This is a pretty easy function to differentiate. We just get 2. We can actually take this derivative, this dy dx, and we could differentiate it again if we want to. We can call the second derivative d squared y over dx squared. In this case, its result would just be 0. Y and x are the most common variables that we see in our function, but it doesn't have to always be y and x. For example, we could have a equals 3b squared minus 2. In this case, we'd call the first derivative dA over dB. And in this example, that would give us 6b. And differentiating a second time would give us d squared a over dB squared, which in this case would come out as 6. So in both of these examples, we have a letter as the name of the function, we have a variable within the function, and we can see the naming process is decided by the name of the function going on top and the variable going on the bottom. But there is different notation that we can use also, and of course notation is just the symbols that we use in maths. So instead of calling our function y is equal to, we might have f of x is equal to. So for example, I might have a function f of x equals x squared minus 2x plus 1. If I differentiate this, I don't call its first derivative dy over dx because I don't have a y in the name of my function. I use a different type of notation instead completely. I call my first derivative f dash x. This means the exact same thing as dy dx, it's just a different way of writing it. In this case, when I differentiate, I get 2x minus 2. Notice how the process is exactly the same as it always has been. It's just that the name that I use looks a little bit different from dy dx. If I get a second derivative in this case, I call it f dash dash x. So the number of dashes just corresponds to how many times I've differentiated. In this case, f dash dash x comes out as 2. The odd time you might also encounter g of x. This is the exact same type of notation as f of x. Let's say in this example, g of x is 4x cubed minus 5x. If I want to differentiate this function, its first derivative will be called g dash x. And in this case, g dash x would come out as 12x squared minus 5. If I was to differentiate another time to get the second derivative, I would just call that g dash dash x. And in this case, that would be 24x. It's good manners in maths to stick with the same kind of notation that the question starts off using. So if the question gives you a function as y is equal to, well then you should use dy dx. But if the question gives you your function as f of x equals 2, then you should use f dash x.